If you want a bath, don't try heating it up with a hairdryer. And he said, what shall I do, Grandad? And I said, you lie, because it won't be remembered why you failed. I said, the important thing is you know you're lying. A lot of places are in floodplains. They're built in floodplains. That is the river. The river, it belongs to the river. And you leave it alone, the river will come back and take it. And I analysed that and found a sun cycle in it, 11-year sun cycle in it. And so actually that's very common in almost everything you look at now.
Hi everybody and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing and first time on the channel guest, gentleman called Paul Burgess, who's an engineer, expert in water planning and has also developed climate models along the way. First of all, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming along today. Me and you are both members of Advance UK, and we're both members of their college, which is a group of people within the political party called Advance UK, who will be looking at policy, looking at direction, we all bring something different. You know, we've got scientists, we've got people like me. You know, I know about social policy, working on the streets, working with disenfranchised people. You're an engineer, you're going to bring that side of things. So we've got lots of people with lots of different types of experience and knowledge. So I think my first question is, why did you join Advance UK and why did you join the college?
Okay, well, why Advance UK? And actually, I was following Ben quite separately before Advance UK, and I'd done one podcast with him. I'd put my second, I think, and it was on the Tuesday or Wednesday. And in the meantime, he went and launched Advance UK. So with a few days to go to the arranged Zoom, he launched it, and I joined immediately because the principles sounded right, and I wanted a party that wasn't afraid. I wanted a party. I don't think Ben wants this for power. I think that's the last thing he wants. I think he'd rather be fishing. I think he'd be off, salmon fishing, which he likes. And so I want a party where almost, it sounds strange, where the people are second, like me, the people are second, like Ben. It's all about getting the right policies for the people. And I felt that was there. So I joined, and I'm 80. So I thought this has been my last big chance. Since 2000, I spent the first 10 years in immigration going on the media. And then I decided, no, I've got to try and change something. So I decided to go into net zero and all this and that. And I concentrate on that. I've made over nearly 300 videos now, heading towards 300 videos. And so I thought, well, this is a chance to actually get involved in policy. And that's also why I joined the college. I'm totally frustrated at the world around me, and I want to change things. And this is the last chance because, I mean, by the time 29 comes, the next election comes, I'll be 84, 84. And, I think I've got to, at some point, retire.
Yeah.
So, so that's why I joined, because I really do think it's all about the policies and what's good for the people. And as Ben said, we wouldn't mind if everyone pitched our ideas and applied them, because that's what matters, the application of them.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what's different about the party. It's not about people wanting a job. And as a college member, as you know, we don't get paid anything. There's nothing in it for us. We don't get expenses or anything. So, I mean, that's great because we're in it just for the principles, as it were. And that's what the party's founded on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm exactly the same. I just want my country to get better. I don't care who takes the credit. I don't care who delivers it. I'm adamant that I'm going to be part of it. And if people want to steal my ideas and take credit for it, as long as those ideas work, I don't care. I just want my country to get better. Now, as we look around our country, nothing works. Absolutely nothing works, especially in the public sector. Let's talk about one thing where you are an expert in, and that's the waterways, the water system. All we seem to see now is our rivers are polluted. We're pumping rubbish and chemicals into our rivers, which never used to happen for most of my lifetime. We used to celebrate old rivers coming back to life, like the Mersey, fishing in the Mersey things. And then over the last 30, 40 years, our rivers have declined. Same with our beaches. And then we're looking at how much we pay for our water utilities, leaks everywhere, water shortages. what is going on with water in a country where it never seems to stop raining?
Well, I was in charge in the end of water resource planning for the whole of Wales and also all technical data. And I was in a nationalised industry then. It was called the Welsh National Water Development Authority in the 70s, and before it was privatised. And I couldn't take it in the end, by the way. I left. I could not accept them. And I'll give you one example. Because I was in charge of all technical data, Lord Brecon, who was the chairman, used to come round offices and do something I liked. He'd pick up a piece of paper and say, "What's this?" And that was his way of finding out. And he picked up a pollution report because they all came into me. "What's this?" And I said, "Oh, it's a pollution report, sir." And he said, "Fine. So what happens to that now?" I said, "I sent her off to operations, put some notes on it, sent her off to operations and to water quality side, and they fired it." And he said, "Yeah." And then I said, "No, that's it." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because we are the polluter. So we can't prosecute ourselves. So what we do is we just cover it up." And that's what we did. And so you had you had that, and an example was one day I had a letter from the Anti-Coastal Pollution League in Wales, and they gave me a map with about four raw sewage outfalls, and they said, "Is this true?" So I wrote a thing back and I gave them a new map with about 15 or 12, I think, something like 12 to 15. I said, "No, this is a whole lot of them. You've missed some." I was heavily criticized by the chief executive for letting that out. But I tried to explain, unless we are honest to the public about the pollution going on, we'll never get the funds to fix it. That's number one, right? And so on. So you've got to be honest. And I came to realize in so many areas in the work that everyone was there for themselves. The organization wasn't there for the public. And I find that generally now in all public services, they evolve to looking after themselves, not looking after the customers, because in the end, they have no discipline of the customer. They don't get sacked. They don't get, when they fail, there's no punishment really. And so that's why I decided to live. I went into business, but in those early years, of course, I did all sorts of other things, So that's why. So if you look at the recent Monmouth floods, for example, where the centre of Monmouth flooded, in the old days we used to dredge that area so the water would get past. But now we don't. They stopped dredging it when these new regimes came in, and so people took over who have no knowledge of what they're doing in every area, and so I was involved in all sorts of big things. I represented Wales on committees in the National Water Resources Board at the time. I did away with one Quango, and I did away with one committee completely by just going away doing the work and stopping their 2-year plan, you know. And so I've been involved in all sorts of things like that. And in doing that, of course, as part of my planning, I had to do hydroclimatology. That's how that came in, which is I had to study the climate for after both floods and droughts and a whole lot. And that's where that came from. So I established, without knowing it at the time, when my first model, I actually established the link between the river flows. I took a river that had no springs, so it's purely down to rainfall, rain-fed river. And I had 100 years of flows, was very lucky. And I analysed that and found a sun cycle in it, an 11-year sun cycle in it. And so actually that's very common in almost everything you look at now. Uh, and and so I was very aware of that. I got heavily involved in economics, as my other thing is economics. So I got heavily involved with that as well. And so that's where I come from. So if you look at things today, one of the things Ben Habib keeps saying is everything is connected. Let me give you an example. Since 2000, we've increased the population just by immigration alone by around about, I think it's 9.6%, call it 10%. Right. That means there's more sewage going in, 10% higher. That means the sewage overflows earlier and gets drained off into the rivers earlier. But that's even worse in the southeast, actually, because it's more than 10% in the southeast. So your structural things. And when I was doing my immigration stuff, I used to be on LBC a lot doing that. When I used to do that, I used to point out we haven't got the infrastructure. When you arrive, At that rate, people were arriving that every 18 months we replaced a city the size of Cardiff. I'm talking about total immigration. And you'd have to build the hospitals, the roads, everything. It takes generations to build up these things. And if you have these sudden surges, the whole thing starts to go. And that's one of the problems. That's got nothing to do with whether, anything else. Just technically, you can connect sewage going into rivers to population increase. Right? That wasn't planned. We planned ahead 50 years. We planned our population things ahead 50 years. We didn't plan for this.
And isn't that part of the problem? I call this short-termism, where governments are looking at, oh, we're going to get a bounce in the economy if we let 1 million people in the country a year. We'll get a small bounce in the economy, but then all the extra spending we need to do, we won't do that. We'll pass that down the road to a future government to take responsibility for that. So no one's doing that long-term planning. I keep referring to, we used to build stately homes and people used to plan the gardens in stately homes, knowing they would never get the benefits of those gardens, but their children and grandchildren may get the benefits of those gardens. We live in a culture at the moment where we want instant gratification. We want to see the bounce today, not 50 years from now.
That's right. And we do that. We do that in many different ways, actually. I come across that all the time. But that's because people in power are there for the wrong reason, really. They can pretend to be the boss of this or the boss of that. And so I was quite a rebel. I really was. I've been a rebel all my life. And the only way I was quite interesting when I had to do my CV for the college. I hadn't done a CV for 50 years, something. And I had to invent one because I wasn't used to it, because I decided to just run my own life for the rest of the time. But I got involved in all sorts of things, and that's where it come from.
I want to discuss the environment with you, but before we do that, I just want to end on the water. Um, why is privatization been a huge failure in the water utility industry in the UK?
Yeah. Can I first of all say that having experienced the nationalized water industry, that was terrible. That was absolutely terrible. And therefore, I don't advocate stopping it being private. What went wrong was the handover. What went wrong was the handover to private, where they didn't understand all the issues around it and the environment. Now, even when I was 11 and I was a poor schoolboy with little tiny, well, I didn't have pocket money. I used to work actually, a newspaper around and everything. And I even donated money every month to anti-pollution because I was a fisherman and I wanted the rivers clean and so on. So the environment's been part of in my blood all my life. And so you've got to hand it over properly and you've got to have an environmental aspect that's pragmatic, right? So you have to say to the people of Monmouth, for example, look, we are going to dredge there as we did before, because if we don't, you're in the floodplain and Monmouth's going to get flooded. A lot of places are in floodplains. They're built in floodplains. That is the river. The river, it belongs to the river, and you leave it alone, the river will come back and take it. Yeah. And you've got to be pragmatic, and they aren't. And the head of Greenpeace had this, and he left and become on our side of the argument, actually. And he found they were anti-chlorine, which was anti-medicine, anti-this, anti-that. And it's like an environmental side has gone wild. The sort of Thunberg, the Greta Thunberg side of things, no rationality to it. And that's been a lot of the control. And so idiots in charge, I'd say. So I would want to privatize it with a different set of criteria, and because I know that the nationalized one doesn't work. Yeah, national, which are automatically these are automatically monopolies. You can't help it. And monopolies traditionally, because they're safe, only make about 5% return. If you look at the electricity industry today, they make about 4.5%, the good ones. And some of them, the big ones, EDF, make about 2.5%, right? And around about 9% of them are insolvent now, and they're going bust. That's a whole story there. But so as I'm a sort of mixture of like the science of climate, a mixture of engineering, and a mixture of environmental issues. Yes, all in. That's my package, as it were.
And that's probably where we need to be, because it can't just be one priority. It has to be, like I say, a mixture of those three priorities will probably get us to the place we need to be. But let's move on to the climate. My first question is this. I've noticed your badge. I love CO2. Are we all going to die very soon? Is the earth going to implode? Are we going to die in a ball of fire? Because I'm sure that's what Greta Thunberg thinks is going to happen.
I'm not sure she does anymore because I mean she's just hire a protester. I mean, right. The answer is no. Obviously, it is no. Well, let me explain something about CO2 and why I've got the badge on because this is fundamental. People don't realize this. The actual scientists on both sides of this argument are very near to each other. That's shocked people. Well, let me tell you, if you actually study and it's mainly physics, this, by the way, the subject here is physics in science. And there's a lack of people who understand the physics. So if you look at how the physics works with CO2 and how it's excited by certain frequencies, etc., then you realize that the measure we have is a doubling of CO2. That's the climate sensitivity. So if it went roughly from 400 to 800, say, how much would it increase? There's hardly any difference. Our side, if you like, says 0.7, of a degree centigrade for a doubling. And the other side says maybe 1 degree now. Some of them say zero point 0.8. So zero point 0.3 of a degree or so, it doesn't matter. So on the basic science there, both sides agree. So why is there such a big difference? Because they have something they add. They add a positive feedback. So what they say is, but that warming causes more water vapor, which is also a greenhouse gas, which causes more warming, and that warming causes more warming, causes and goes up. That's never happened in the history of climate, by the way, but never mind. So that's why you have models which are 300% different, depending on which one you choose. To say it's settled when their own climate models are like that on the graph is absurd. So that's number one. Now, then you have to realize that the CO2 has never been a control thermostat of the climate. So you can't dial it up and say it's going to get hotter. You can't do that. But in the sense that it's not the control thermostat, we do have a very good one. It's called clouds. And clouds, if you're on a beach sunbathing, and I do, when I make my videos, I put a nice pretty girl on the beach so that everyone can look on bathing on a towel, and I do a cloud coming over, and I say, you feel that instantly. You feel that cooling instantly in the shadow. I mean, it is instant. And the cloud actually acts as an insulator as well. So a cold day, like today, here where I am, it's become clear and it's gone very cold. With the clouds are there, they'd be like a blanket. But the actual insulating effect of low clouds is far smaller than the reflection back to space of it. So overall, those clouds you see, and people can argue about very high cirrus clouds, but those clouds you see are at control. So how sensitive are we to those clouds? Well, let me tell you this, the whole of the double of the warming, the whole of the 1 degree can be accounted for by 1 or 2% change in the clouds. That's it. So the thermostat, if I had to say it, it's more complicated. I am simplifying a bit, but the thermostat is the clouds. Okay? And that is fundamental. Now, and then I will argue the next point is we don't have climate scientists on the other side. We have And there's no such thing as a climate scientist, by the way, because, I was called that on telly when I first went on, and I was shocked when I sat down. They said climate, because I don't regard that myself as one, but I know there aren't any anywhere in the world. There's physicists, there's statisticians, there's climate people like myself, there's geologists, there's everything. You'd have to be an expert you'd spend your whole life becoming an expert in something and not do anything. There's no such thing. And the second reason is this. In science, and this is absolutely fundamental, there are two rules, and it's not my talks up with this. There are two basic rules. And one is you do not use an appeal to authority to have an argument. So I can't say, look, I've got Professor William Happer, or I've got two Nobel Prize winners saying the same thing as me. That's an appeal to authority. Why doesn't that mean anything? Example I give is this. If you had a clerk in an office come up with an idea in physics, and a whole 100 scientists in the world, not one supported him. They were all ridiculous. And it seemed good, and no one could argue too much with him. So what they did was they wrote it in the newspapers, and 100 people signed it and said, he's rubbish. Yes? His name was Einstein, and he was a clerk in the patent office. And so that's an appeal to authority. We can't use it. And the second thing is that you've got to confirm your work with reality. So if it's not real, if it doesn't check out against reality, then it's no good. No matter how clever you are, no matter what degrees you've got. And we've got, I'm not get. Someone recently on the phone called me, said to me, "Oh, you're an academic. I've just done a paper." I said, "I'm not an academic. I'm too pragmatic to be an academic. I could have chosen to be that, but then what I would do to get a PhD is go along and study one little subject. So I'd study a glacier in Switzerland, and that's it. I mean, then you get. So I don't want that. I applied my work. I applied my work right across the board in real life, and so that's they're the two rules of science. And so people who can't accept skepticism, questioning aren't scientists at all. They're no one actually. If I call myself anything, I'd be a technologist or something that applies science and uses science in the real world. Well, that's what technology is, applying to science. But I have to create the science sometimes. But so without that skepticism, so what do we have in universities? They won't have me in there. I can tell you now that way back, a man tried to book London Palladium with me against a world famous professor. I won't name him and embarrass him. Would you do it? And he reckoned he could sell tickets and make some money. So I said, fine. I actually didn't ask for any money because I'd love that opportunity. So we had a Zoom call with this American leading famous professor, and it became apparent in the Zoom call they didn't know the subject. I mean, what shocked me was he'd never heard of what's called a hockey stick, which is fundamental to all our science. It's how the scale really got going. And and I realized that. So I had the choice. Do I actually start briefing him now? I'm going to be on stage with him. Do I actually brief? I mean, the man's totally ignorant. And when we came off, the producer said to me, he doesn't know the subject, does he? So I said, no. So at the end, he said, look, in fairness to him, he said, I don't know parts of this very well, so I can have another professor on who does. And the two of you against one, would you agree to that? So I agreed. Two against one, London Palladium sounded good. And then and then he said, "Oh, the other one came on, by the way. We had another Zoom with two of them." And then I realised he didn't know his subject, just too narrow. And then and actually, what we discussed was the medieval warm period. And I've done a paper on that, which shows it's worldwide because they argue. Because if you look at all the castles with the sea level and all that, all these standard arguments, and that's because the sea level was much higher in the medieval warm period, and it was much warmer. They'll argue, well, that was local. I mind you, the sea managed to be higher there and low other places, but never mind. And so I did a paper on that. And when I started to point out things like the black spruce forest in Canada that was 80 miles north, and that was there 1,000 years ago, yeah, and it was 80 miles above the tree line. Yeah, we'll do Canada. And I said, well, let's take South Africa. So when I did all of that and worked out that there isn't that much land in the Southern Hemisphere, and you have to allow for that. So I got New Zealand, Australia covered with papers, research papers, that I was able to prove that the medieval warm period was global. That's the sort of thing I do. So I'm just a rebel. I just love going into these things and doing that. And I issue quite a lot of papers, and I was working on one last night actually about what's coming to the UK in the way of disaster. But so that's where I am, and that's where I am with science.
So my I mean, I've not got much knowledge on this topic at all, but what I do know is that the climate, the temperature, the CO2 levels of the Earth are always in flux. They're always going up. They're always coming down. We go through ice ages, mini ice ages, then they go. We have glaciers covering continents, then they recline and disappear. Then we have this, that, and I've seen some documentaries where a lot of people seem to be able to work out, like you said before, a sun cycle. It seems to be cycles that we're going through all the time. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, we've actually got lots of cycles. So let me tell you a really big one. I've got a list of cycles actually. I think there's about 20 of them. Now, one of the big ones is called the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, and it's around about 69 years. So every 30 odd years it flips. Yeah, from the equator to the North Pole to the Arctic, it warms by up to a degree, a point 0.8 degree or so, and it warms, and that's more. Oh, I mean, we've only had just over 1.5 degrees since the Industrial Revolution. And by the way, it started warming 150 years before that. But so when you think this sea warms up, the reason is the sea holds 1,000 times more heat than the atmosphere. Right. You try, if you want a bath, don't try heating it up with a hairdryer, right? Because it'll take an awful long time. In fact, you won't do it, right? But you've got to heat it up from internally, as it were. So it's 1,000 times more heat and it flops. But there isn't just the Atlantic one, there's the Pacific one, there's the Indian Ocean dipole, which does that. The dipole can cause very unusual weather in the Middle East, actually, and so on. And there's others. And I did a paper recently, and it's a hypothesis really. And what I did is I went back to 1900, and I took all of these factors, natural factors together, including the sun cycles, and I combined them. I weighted each one, and then I correlated it, and I accounted for 88% or 85%. It's a correlation factor of 0.94. So it's about 86 or something percent of all. So I explained all the variations. It explained the 1930s. It explained the 19 cooling the 40s to 70s and everything just by looking at natural things. So you've got lots of natural cycles, and there are many sun cycles as well. There isn't just the one sun cycle. And I always teach my grandkids things by shocking them with science. I love it. So I'll say, what does the Earth rotate around? And they'll say, the sun. And I'll say, no, it doesn't. It rotates around a point outside the sun because the planets pull the sun and the sun pulls the planets. And the point where we rotate around is outside the sun called the barycenter. And actually, that's got cycles. And that has a small influence because the sun's wobbling like this terribly around this barycenter with all the planets. Yes. So that I love science, and I love doing that. And I also teach children. My grandson brought up a point about the coral reefs in the Great Barrier Reef and the standard stuff. So I actually made a 1.5 minute on a very short video for him, just for him, to prove that it's healthy, the healthiest it's ever been on record. And when I saw him, he said, I didn't like that, Grandad. I said, why? And he said, well, you proved me wrong. And I said, but would you rather carry on in life being wrong or learn? So I said, unless you're willing to be wrong, you'll never do anything, you know. Those are the lessons I like to teach kids: is how you do science and what science is. I like that, but I'm not allowed near them these days, of course, because where I have schools arranged, they'll just get cancelled. The Isle of Man government got interfered with, and the debating society I was going to give there, and no one would debate me. That's another thing. No one wants to debate me. I'd love to debate people openly, yeah, but they don't do it.
Well, isn't that because they know they haven't got answers to your questions, or they know that they don't have answers in general?
Yeah, what happened on GB News was really interesting. As you know, you have a green room before you go on. And I was in the green room with a lady who was on the opposite side. And the subject was a paper from a Reading University professor who'd said there's a lot more turbulence because of climate change. And this is why one plane had somebody in turbulence, and it caused all the news. And he'd done this paper on a mid-Atlantic model. So an engineer, so I just looked up the frequency of turbulence in airplanes. There's a graph of it. And because the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority in America, you have to report everything. If it's above a certain level of turbulence, it becomes an incident. And what we found was the two types of turbulence. And one was the turbulence you can see, and we learned to avoid that. So we had a big reduction in that with our radars and things. Yeah. But the clear air turbulence, I'd love to go into that, the whole pile of stuff, but you can't see it, right? So the clear air turbulence, not so. I showed the graph, and I showed it to the woman in the green room. So when we arrived with four of us on there, yeah, everyone was agreeing because she understood she was wrong before she came on. And then the professor had a go at me on Facebook, and he called me he called me extreme right, this, that, all the standard stuff. So, and a lot of people said, well, I then made a comment, so he banned me. Another person made a comment, he banned them, and he banned anyone who was on my side, right? So I did a video about him because I wasn't going to let him off with that. You know, that's not a scientist doing that. And he wouldn't argue with the actual data. And that's the level of universities today, I'm afraid. And we have to change all that. We have to have people who are not scared to do research, not scared to get not. I know a number of people who are worried about their jobs or being sacked in universities because they've got different points of views, right? If you stare too much, you're sacked, you're out the system.
Isn't that an indictment on our university sector that it's not education anymore now? It seems to be indoctrination.
And yeah, and even worse for kids.
You the best ways to think. We're going to teach you what to think. Where universities used to be, we're going to give you the tools so you can explore the world yourself and find things yourself. Yeah.
Kids should be taught, number one, how to think. And today, they're not. My grandson phoned me up. He was about 14 or 15. He was taking a geography exam, and the paper was going to be on climate. And he said, do I lie and pass, get an A, or do I tell the truth and fail? And he said, what shall I do, Grandad? And I said, you lie, because it won't be remembered why you failed. I said, the important thing is you know you're lying and you know how corrupt the system is, right? But to teach children what they teach children, all the doom and gloom in school, is criminal in my view, absolutely criminal. And if it was open, look, if it was true, why won't they debate me? If it was true, why wherever I go, like the other man, there was arranged going to be a debate. The other person wouldn't come, no one would come. And so I said, I can't teach the children my views. So what I'll do, I'll change my talk to what science is, which is how to think. So I wasn't even going to mention my views on climate, but the government got wind of it, cancelled it, and then they sent in people just after that to train the pupils on all the propaganda. You know, you can't win. And that I do videos about the Isle of Man all the time. It's like my lab test for the UK, trying to change them, you know. So that's that.
Right. So let's end on this question. So you go to bed tonight, you wake up in 5, 10 years' time. What do you want to see in the UK? What should the UK look like in 5, 10 years' time? What would make you happy?
I'd like we're heading into super danger. We're heading into, I'm not kidding about this. We're heading into hospitals being cut off from electricity for long periods. The generators in hospitals normally last 2 or 3 days, about 72 hours tops. And we're heading into wind droughts. We've had two recent ones in the region of 20 days. And we're heading into situations of where you can't isolate the hospital because the same substation serves other people. And so we're heading into serious blackouts. We really are. And I just can't believe the management of our grid is so bad. And that's a big thing for me is the grid. I spent a long time on the technology there. So I'd like to see a world when I wake up where we've got normal priced energy at about 12p a kilowatt hour, which we could have, right? We're choosing not to, and where we've got safety and security in our grid. And that gives prosperity to everything because it controls everything. Instead of which, we close the steelworks down like Port Talbot. And then what we do is we say we put electric furnaces in and we furnish them with the most expensive industrial electricity in the developed world, which means they fail before they begin, right? Idiots in charge. And I'm sorry, but they are. Ed Miliband is a dangerous, dangerous man, dangerous. And so the video I started work on with a paper last night was about that. It's about extreme blackouts coming, and they say they can do energy demand. They have nice words for it, but what it means is cutting off that region, then that region, and they're going to try to get you not to use electricity or pay you not to use it, big style. Yeah, it's madness. And so a world with energy sanity in it would be nice to wake up to. There's lots of other things I'd like. But I don't, and I'd add to that a country where everyone is really on the same path, which is a united country, and a culture a culture. I mean, I'm an atheist, so I'm not a Christian, but I welcome that culture, as it were. That's the culture I was brought up in. I like hymns and everything, you know. So I like that culture, and so I can't. The one side of what I want give me the prosperity, the energy, but the other side has to be there as well. It has to be the culture we had before. That's what I like.
Absolutely. I thoroughly agree with that. Paul, thank you so much for coming on. I'll put your link to your videos in the description of this video so people can go and have a look at some of them. I'm going to have a look myself. And let's hopefully let's do this again sometime.
Great. I'd like to do it on the grid because there's some real good points to discuss on the grid in the future. But thank you.
Absolutely. But and that's really important because we can't live our lives with no electricity. We can't live our lives if nothing works because everything now requires electricity, everything.
You see, you don't without electricity, you don't even get the water. You don't get the sewage. The sewage blocks. Everything stops. You can't get the fuel to the generators to carry on with the generation in the hospital. It's really right from, and you don't get the communications. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Paul, thank you so much. And I'll speak to you again soon.
Bye.